In episode 2 of House of the Dragon, the show chooses to greatly expand on Daemon giving a dragon egg to Mysaria and the conflict this brings him into with both his brother and Sir Otto. King Viserys also declares his intention to marry Lady Alicent Hightower to the small council. And now let's begin. In a lavish ceremony at King's Landing, hundreds of lords did obeisance to the realm's delight as she sat at her father's feet at the base of the Iron Throne, swearing to honour and defend her right of succession. Prince Daemon was not amongst them, however. Furious at the king's decree, the prince quit King's Landing, resigning from the city watch. He first went to Dragonstone, taking his paramour Mysaria with him upon the back of his dragon Caraxes, the lean red beast the small folk called the Bloodworm. There he remained for half a year, during which time he got Mysaria with child. When he learnt that his concubine was pregnant, Prince Daemon presented her with a dragon's egg. But in this, he again went too far and woke his brother's wrath. King Viserys commanded him to return the egg, send his whore away, and return to his lawful wife, or else be attainted as a traitor. The prince obeyed, though with ill grace, dispatching Mysaria, eggless, back to Lys, whilst he himself flew to Runestone in the Vale and the unwelcome company of his bronze bitch. But Mysaria lost her child during a storm on the narrow sea. When word reached Prince Daemon, he spoke no syllable of grief, but his heart hardened against the king, his brother. Thereafter, he spoke of King Viserys only with disdain, and began to brood day and night on the succession. Though Princess Rhaenyra had been proclaimed her father's successor, there were many in the realm, at court and beyond it, who still hoped that Viserys might father a male heir, for the young king was not yet 30. Grand Maester Runkita was the first to urge his grace to remarry, even suggesting a suitable choice, the lady Laena Velaryon, who had just turned 12, a fiery young maiden freshly flowered. Lady Laena had inherited the beauty of a true Targaryen from her mother, Rhaenys, and a bold, adventurous spirit from her father, the Sea Snake. As Lord Coles loved to sail, Laena loved to fly, and had claimed for her own no less a mount than mighty Vhagar, the oldest and largest of the Targaryen dragons since the passing of the Black Dread in 94 AC. By taking the girl to wife, the king could heal the rift that had grown up between the Iron Throne and Driftmark, Runkita pointed out, and Laena would surely make a splendid queen. Viserys the First Targaryen was not the strongest-willed of kings, it must be said. Always amicable and anxious to please, he relied greatly on the counsel of the men around him, and did as they bade more oft than not. In this instance, however, his grace had his own notion, and no amount of argument would sway him from his course. He would marry again, yes, but not to a 12-year-old girl, and not for reasons of state. Another woman had caught his eye. He announced his intention to wed Lady Alicent of House Hightower, the clever and lovely 18-year-old daughter of the King's Hand, the girl who had read to King Jaehaerys as he lay dying. The Hightowers of Oldtown were an ancient and noble family, of impeccable lineage. There could be no possible objection to the king's choice of bride. Even so, there were those who murmured that the Hand had risen above himself, that he had brought his daughter to court with this in mind. A few even cast doubt on Lady Alicent's virtue, suggesting she had welcomed King Viserys into her bed even before Queen Aemma's death. These calumnies were never proved, though Mushroom repeats them in his testimony and goes so far as to claim that reading was not the only service Lady Alicent performed for the old king in his bedchamber. In the Vale, Prince Daemon reportedly whipped the serving man who brought the news to him within an inch of his life. Nor was the Sea Snake pleased when word reached Driftmark. House Velaryon had been passed over once again. His daughter, Laena, scorned just as his son, Laenor, had been scorned by the Great Council and his wife by the old king back in 92 AC. Only Lady Laena herself seemed untroubled. Her ladyship shows far more interest in flying than in boys, the Maester at High Tide wrote to the Citadel. When King Viserys took Alicent Hightower to wife in 106 AC, House Velaryon was notable for its absence. Princess Rhaenyra poured for her stepmother at the feast, and Queen Alicent kissed her, and named her daughter. The princess was amongst the women who disrobed the king and delivered him to the bedchamber of his bride. Laughter and love ruled the Red Keep that night, whilst across Blackwater Bay, Lord Corlys the Sea Snake welcomed the king's brother, Prince Daemon, to a war council. The prince had suffered all he could stand of the Vale of Arryn, Runestone, and his lady wife. Darksister was made for nobler tasks than slaughtering sheep, he is reported to have told the Lord of the Tides. She has a thirst for blood. But it was not rebellion that the prince had in mind. He saw another path to power. The Stepstones, the chain of rocky islands between Dorne and the disputed lands of Essos, had long been a haunt of outlaws, exiles, wreckers, and pirates. Of themselves, the isle were of little worth, but placed as they were, they controlled the sea lanes to and from the narrow sea, and merchant ships passing through those waters were often preyed on by their inhabitants. Still, for centuries such depredations had remained no more than a nuisance. 10 years earlier, however, the free cities of Lys, Myr, and Tyrosh had put aside their ancient enmities to make common cause in a war against the Volantis. After defeating the Volantines in the Battle of the Borderland, the three victorious cities had entered into an internal alliance and formed a strong new power, the Triarchy, better known in Westeros as the Kingdom of the Three Daughters, as each of the free cities considered itself a daughter of Valyria of old, or more rudely, the Kingdom of the Three Whores, though this kingdom was without a king, being governed by a council of 33 magisters. Once Volantis sued for peace and withdrew from the disputed lands, the three daughters had turned their gaze westward, sweeping over the Stepstones with their combined armies and fleets under the command of the Myrish Prince Admiral, Craghas Drehar, who earned the sobriquet Craghas Crabfeeder, staked out hundreds of captured pirates on the wet sands, to drown beneath the rising tide. The conquest and annexation of the Stepstones by the kingdoms of the three daughters at first met with only approval from the lords of Westeros. Order had replaced chaos, and if the three daughters demanded a toll of any ship passing through their waters, that seemed a small price to pay to be rid of the pirates. The avarice of Craghas Crabfeeder and his partners in conquest soon turned feelings against them, however. The toll was raised again and yet again, soon becoming so ruinous that merchants who had once paid gladly now sought to slip past the galleys of the Triarchy, as once they had the pirates. Drehar and his Lysene and Tyroshi co-admirals seemed to be vying with each other to see who was the greediest, men complained. The Lyseni became especially loathed, for they claimed more than coin from passing ships, taking off women, girls, and comely young boys to serve in their pleasure gardens and pillow houses. Amongst those thus enslaved was Lady Joanna Swan, a 15-year-old niece of the Lord of Stoneham. When her infamously niggardly uncle refused to pay the ransom, she was sold to a pillow house, where she rose to become the celebrated courtesan known as the Black Swan, and ruler of Lys in all but name. Alas, her tale, however fascinating, has no bearing upon our present history. During that same fateful year, Sir Criston Cole was appointed to the Kingsguard to fill the place created by the death of the legendary Sir Ryam Redwine. Born the son of a steward in service to Lord Dondarrion of Blackhaven, Sir Criston was a comely young knight of 23 years. Now, the show chose not to include a scene of Maester Runkita convincing King Viserys to marry again, which means the show might not be adapting the Old Town conspiracy, which theorizes that the Maesters are secretly responsible for bringing about the Dance of the Dragons. But we shall see. Anyway, this was a really great episode of House of the Dragon, and we can't wait to make more videos on the differences between show and book. In the meantime, check out our playlists on every chapter of A Game of Thrones Explained, and our entire A Feast for Dragons book Explained. Also, when you get the chance, try out Fantasy Flight's A Game of Thrones board game digital edition.